Hi, what do you think? You think we're ready? We got a lot to get through today, so why don't we kick it off? All right, awesome. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've got a really exciting kind of action-packed hour today. And I think just one thing to acknowledge that I think is really cool is we do have folks registered from all over the US here. We've got a lot of folks in New York, including our panelists. We also have, I think I saw some registrants from like Iowa, California, Florida represented here, which is really exciting. My name is Lindsay. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Super. We're a technology platform that's building software tools to help property managers, real estate developers, building boards, streamline operations, improve communications, and elevate the resident experience. We call it the operating system for buildings. And Super was born out of personal experiences. So I've personally been in the field of technology for most of my career, and I started investing in real estate and joining the boards of buildings. And I think, coming from technology, I was pretty shocked at just how manual everything was. And it's a tough job. And I think the reality of it is it's only getting harder. For instance, in New York, where I'm dialing in from, we've had a really eerily warm winter. And I think that's kind of freaking me out that this summer is going to be a little crazy. And I know, on the flip side of that, that helps with some of the worries about inflation and the impact on gas and heating costs that people were worried about going into this winter, but it does make you wonder just how much the electricity bills this summer will be. And I think that's just one example of a few of the trends that we've identified at Super that will be top of mind for real estate industry folks in this coming year in 2023. And the fact is that this is an industry that does have to deal directly with the consequences of this confluence of challenges, right? You have a volatile economy, you have rising resident expectations, new technologies that are coming through, climate change, and of course, increasing regulation and compliance as well. And so today, I've got the pleasure of assembling this really amazing group of experts to help us understand these trends and changes and to discuss strategies and insights for real estate and property management teams. So grateful that they've given us their time and expertise. Just one quick word of housekeeping before I turn it over to them. There is a box that you'll see in your Zoom webinar for Q&A. So you can add your questions into this Q&A area of the Zoom webinar. Please feel free to write them as you go, and we'll try to incorporate them as we're having the discussion, but we will also leave time at the end for questions as well. So looking forward to hearing to what you all have to say. So now I'm going to turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves. So I'm going to start with Chris.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. To both the viewers here and to my fellow panelists. My name is Chris Tarnok. I'm an attorney here in New York, a partner at the law firm of DL Partners, a real estate firm in Midtown, New York. I represent property owners, unit owners, shareholders, condo and co-op boards, sponsors and developers, and contractors and architects in their construction and real estate related needs.
You represent them all.
Here.
If you're in real estate, just call Chris.
Everybody there.
Now you know who to call. Perfect. Tina.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, for putting this together and for having me today. So I am known as the powerhouse behind the Folson Group, New York City's premier co-op and condo consultant that helps residential property owners and boards reduce their operating costs as well as repairing and upgrading their buildings. I'm also a published author of Living the High Life, How Smart Co-op and Condo Owners Protect Themselves and Their Investment. That's the book over there somewhere. Thank you.
Amazing. And Sophia.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sophia Song, and I am not in the real estate industry directly. I work actually out of the Gensler Research Institute, and Gensler, if you don't know, Gensler is the world's largest design and architecture firm. We established a research institute about 17 years ago to really study the connection between design, business, and human experience. And so we do a lot of research related to real estate. I lead research on cities, which has a very macro perspective, but we also have a lot of workplace research, residential research, climate resilience research that are all spearheaded by my colleagues. And I'll be talking about some of those findings today. Prior to working at Gensler, I did work in prop tech. I used to be the head of research for Street Easy, and then moved over to Compass and then over to Douglas Elliman. So I think you might be aware of those companies. But I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Lindsay, for bringing us together, and happy to share this macro perspective.
Amazing. I love that we have such a diverse group of perspectives here, spanning law to kind of the global aspect of cities and expertise on the condo and co-op side as well. The first question I have for you all is just a broad one to set the tone. And the thing that I like to really think about is the types of capabilities and platforms. And I think of tools, right? So what are the tools that we need in our toolkits to be able to thrive when you're thinking about a healthy building? Obviously at Super, we believe that technology is a critical tool for the real estate industry to embrace. It's also one of the key trends that we'll talk about that we think has a lot of room to grow as well. So my first question to you all is, what do you think is the most important tool the real estate industry needs to add to their toolkits this year? Maybe Tina, I'll start with you.
Yeah, sure, Lindsay. So the most important tool, in my opinion, is those that help boards and property owners stay proactive. So with aging buildings and systems and increasing regulation to keep us all safe, it's more important than ever to upgrade buildings and monitor usage, etc. And of course, that's done through technology. And sensors have come a very long way, actually, also. So sensors can detect problems before they turn into emergencies.
I love that answer. Thank you for that. Sophia, what about your perspective?
Oh, interesting. So, definitely going to the technology angle. I think for me, just because I am, a researcher and an analyst, for me, the importance is good data, something that the real estate industry is really kind of slow on. And I think, any tool that allows for the capture of good, accurate data, whether it's at the unit level or the building level, is definitely something that the industry needs, because without good data, you can't have good analysis, and therefore you wouldn't be able to plan accordingly. So anything that allows for capture, like good data, I think would be my vote.
Awesome. And I'm sure we'll touch more on that part as well. Chris, what is your thought? A tool that every real estate person needs in their toolkit this year?
Well, so I'm going to echo with Tina and Sophia said, and I think technology is definitely a tool in a tool belt always, and especially this year. Just focus on real estate, and condo and co-op boards, just not to forget that these individuals serving on boards are on a volunteer basis. So any technology that they can utilize that would help them in terms of communication and organization, I think is going to go a long way. Things that they can bring to the table the issues that I see that arise are communication and organization, right? Effective communication to avoid, miscommunication, delivering a message, sometimes can lead to disputes. In terms of, building operation, alteration, unit work, alteration work, keeping all the documents together, alteration agreements, contractor insurance agreement, documents, things of that nature. It'll help, process information, give the information quickly to third parties for, analysis, whether that's in a lawyer like me or somebody else, if something comes up. So, that would be my answer.
That is a lot to think about. And I promised all of the attendees here, we did not prep everyone to say technology, but clearly that is a top of mind thing, and echoing one of the top trends that we believe is really coming down the pipe for folks. Anything else to add? Tina, I saw you on mute.
Yeah, so I have something to add, because we very often see boards, not all boards, of course, it's never one. We often see that they use this technology in their everyday life. So in business, they use Google Drives or OneDrives or whatever, Dropbox. And then when they go home and they're volunteers in their co-op, and then they don't use the same tools. So I always tell them, I said, listen, if you use Asana at work, use Asana for your board. If you use Dropbox, use Dropbox, because those are technologies that they're already familiar with. Of course, they can add things like Super or other technologies, but there are technologies that they're already familiar with and that they're already using. And we just try to encourage them to use the same technologies for their board.
That's great. And I think that adoption point is so big, right? I think one of the things that we see anyway is boards struggling to get people on the same page on what tools to use as well. And so certainly a battle, right, for folks to just get aligned on how to deal with that. I want to bring us to our first trend, which is the economy. I think that's really top of mind for folks right now. And I think if you spend any time reading the news, you're probably a little confused about the state of the economy, right? We've had a really long period of overall growth and a healthy stock market and economy that was booming. But now as a result, we've got inflation, got rising interest rates, and that's really hurting the buying selling side of things. There is talk of a looming recession, especially in certain sectors like tech. There's just, a new news story about a layoff every single day. And then of course, there's just general market volatility. So if anyone, and don't, I would recommend do not check your 401k balances on the regular, because it is very volatile right now. And all of these things are coming together. And I think it's just a very scary and confusing time for individuals, but also at the building level. So first question coming off of that is, what does that mean in practice for buildings and their residents when it comes to thinking about how to maintain a healthy building from a financial perspective? And I know, Tina, you think about this all day long, so I might throw this to you first.
I do think about this all day long. So what uncertainty means for buildings, boards, and residents is threefold. It's even more important to reduce any wasteful spending. There's no reason to hand extra money to travelers, Edison or Verizon, that doesn't absolutely need to be spent. Number two, it also means that now more than ever, preventive maintenance needs to be taken care of, because it's always much more cost effective to taking care of or doing preventive maintenance than it is to wait for emergencies. And number three is Local Law 97, which I know we're going to touch on later, right? But Local Law 97, it used to be that boards and buildings couldn't come to a decision on retrofitting their building to reduce their energy use or water use. Now they know that by either 2024 or 2030, they have to do it. And for every single month that they wait, they're actually spending money that there's no reason to spend. So those are the three items that I think is very important when it comes to the state of the economy and uncertainty.
That's great. And I do want to touch on Local Law 97, and maybe we'll get to that kind of after we talk a little bit more about kind of the economic impacts. I think one thing that you did mention, Tina, though, is that people have to think about investments into their buildings and properties as well. How should they be thinking about capital expenditures and making those types of investments in an environment where capital is more expensive to borrow? And on the flip side, the residents don't feel the same financial security. And so that assessment, right, is just going to be that much more painful for folks. So are there any tips for how to think about that? And I'll look to you.
Yes, absolutely. So the way that they need to think about it is, what's the payback period? So when we propose retrofits to buildings, we always propose them together with payback period. So upgrading the light fixtures in the hallways and the basements and putting them on motion sensors typically has a 2 to 3 year payback period. Whereas replacing the windows might have a 10 to 20 year payback period. So we always put together what is the most urgent. Obviously, if the windows are not working, then maybe that is more necessary for that particular building. When it comes to the light sensors, those are actually a new requirement by 2024. Whenever you walk into a building and you see that the lights do not turn off, you know that by December 31st, 2024, they're going to start getting fined for not having them on motion sensors.
That's a good tip for anyone in New York with a building there. Think about it.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Now I know why you're talking about sensors so much, Tina. Sophia, Chris, anything else to add there?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Sorry. So I would just add, in being proactive, on a board level, there are some things that are more elective, and there are some, projects that are required by the law that you need to undertake. So, understanding where your building is, a building exterior envelope, but your building systems. I think there are steps the board can and should take, and that can make them better situated for a climate like this, where it may be a little bit more to borrow. Look at your building systems. Are you maintaining things? Are you have routine maintenance? Are there warranties? What's the age of the systems? So you can kind of forecast where you'll be. Maybe you can push things off a little bit more where it's a little bit more favorable. Just on a business decision for boards, a little legal thing here. Decisions by board members need to be in the best interests of the building, whether it's the condo or co-op. So it means, as long as it's not self-dealing or a self-interest where a board member is benefiting from it, it's going to be protected by what's called the business judgment rule in New York. And you're going to just have to, proactive measures are going to lead to a better outcome. So that's what I would just encourage. I think buildings that have been doing that are probably finding themselves better situated now than others.
Awesome. Sophia, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, with capital being at such a premium right now, I'll just talk from that architecture firm perspective. At Gensler, what we've seen our most successful clients do is actually beta testing incremental changes. So when you do these incremental changes and you're testing it, you're identifying all your stakeholders and testing out the changes and measuring like the effectiveness of these changes with each stakeholder group. That really allows you to maximize that capital and get the biggest bang for the buck. And so that's what we're seeing with some of our clients.
I love hearing that also, because I feel like that's such a technology term, right? Just a really iterative way to kind of test your way to the right solution. And it's interesting to see how in the built world that can come to life as well.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I think tied to what we've been talking about here, and specifically, some of these sustainability requirements as well, I think it's hard to have this conversation without talking about what's happening with climate, right? LA had its first snowstorm before New York did. Weird, right? This winter. And so there's a lot of things happening, right? You've got rising sea levels, wildfires, depending on where you are, there's a lot of different natural disasters, right? That now folks need to be prepared for, depending on the cities that they're in. And as a result, the management teams, the properties, and the residents now have to have these plans in place as well. It takes a lot of coordination, it takes board input. But what I am hearing from some of our customers as well is that a lot of that burden is now falling on the property managers to triage emergencies. So when there is, for instance, flooding that's happening in an area, they're the ones that are getting that first call. And so I'm really curious about how properties should be thinking about whose responsibility it is to take on some of these things and how they should be scoping for that. Like, what's board responsibility, what's management responsibility, what's government responsibility. And I know, Sophia, you all do a lot of research on this, so maybe there's some insights from that.
Yeah, I can definitely talk about our most recent resilience research that we did, because it was last year where we did this study in the US to really understand how people have been affected by climate change, natural disasters, and severe weather events, and how they expect to be impacted, as well as the actions that they're currently taking and are willing to take to make, their buildings, their cities, their communities much more prepared for climate change. And so the vast majority of people, about like 3/4 of people, say that climate change is this urgent issue that needs to be addressed. But on the flip side, you have less than 20% of people who feel that their community is built to withstand climate change. So there's this really big disparity. And, you know, according to our study, like almost everyone, 90% of respondents felt that they were impacted by these extreme weather events, right? And large majorities of property owners, about 4 out of 5 people are willing to take action. But the biggest barrier to making any changes is actually the cost. The cost is proving to be the primary barrier to preparing their home for like these extreme weather events. So whose responsibility is it? Well, according to our research, 70% of people agree that addressing climate change is everyone's responsibility, right? From the owner to property managers to private businesses and government. And in fact, almost everyone agreed that they see a need for government action to address climate change. And in fact, most of them say that the government should invest in renewable energy as well as technology that leads to energy efficiency. So at the building level, it's all about investing in building improvements that are going to lead to energy efficiency or repairing and reuse, encouraging lower consumption and recycling. But it's going to take all levels. So I don't know if that answered your question.
It's everybody's. Okay. Sounds great.
Exactly.
What about some of these? You mentioned that the cost is going up. Are there any specific examples of some of the realities that folks are being faced with today on a cost level?
Yeah, my goodness. So with these natural disasters, I mean, it's increased costs for everyone in every aspect. And so, like I said before, 90% have been impacted by extreme weather events, right? They've had their power disrupted, they've lost access to internet, access to roads, to work, to school. So ultimately, all of this leads to increased insurance costs. And some properties have such high insurance costs that only the wealthy can afford them and to live there. And insurance companies, they're finding out that they are not prepared for all these disasters and the high payouts. So a lot of them are working with owners, with boards, with property managers to take more preventative measures, more mitigation measures. There is one great example coming out of Florida. It's called Babcock Ranch. And maybe you heard of it, but definitely Google it. It's a development that is located 20 miles from the coast of Fort Myers. And in Hurricane Ian, which you may remember from last year, which basically devastated the whole eastern coast of Florida, they were the only development that never lost power or internet. And that was because it's the first like sustainable, like solar powered development in the area. And so because they didn't lose power or internet, it's now becoming, people are now looking at it as a model on how to mitigate for future hurricanes that will come to Florida. So it's, and again, right, it's that reliance on technology or exploring how technology can help mitigate and help prevent these help mitigate these disasters.
What an interesting case study, because I think that also brings to light, a lot of what we've already been talking about around regulation and kind of the changes that certain cities like New York are enacting. So we've mentioned local law 97, which is going to have a really big, massive influence on building accountability for carbon emissions. And it frankly will be very expensive for a lot of buildings if they don't get ahead of this. So I know, Chris, you think about this all the time, but Chris, can you just explain for us as the lawyer in the room
Sure.
what local law 97 is?
Sure. So local law 97 is New York's emissions law. It seeks to make New York City carbon neutral by 2050. it's it's a tall order. It's going to be very impactful on the city. It's going to be in stages. So the first one is first period is 2024, which is just around the corner, where they anticipate about 25% of buildings in New York being impacted. And if you're not part of the impacted buildings there, certainly in 2030, you may be, because they anticipate around 75% of buildings in New York City being impacted. So, it's a law that's, it's trying to, combat the emissions here. And New York's largest greenhouse gases come from buildings. So that's where the laws, is aimed to try to curtail those emissions. Buildings are going to have benchmarks that they're going to have to meet. They're going to have to submit reports starting May 1st, 2025, capturing the prior year, certifying what the building emissions were. And if it's below the benchmarks, great. And if it's above the benchmarks, they're going to get hit with penalties and fines. The fines are going, it's not a walk in the park. These fines are going to be, costly. It's going to be thousands, tens of thousands, sometimes maybe even millions. Annual fines for the buildings that to pay. The law is it's still, the details are still kind of being finessed and rolled out. If there's details about, I'm sure everyone has heard about renewable energy credits and how they can be used. Will there be limitations on them? There's still details and discussions on, well, what would constitute good faith in making the adjustments, that you just couldn't get there as a building despite due diligence. What does good faith, good efforts constitute according to the city? So we've been following that, and all these it's a constantly, it's an evolving, it's a law that's been in place since 2019. I think it a little bit flew under the radar during COVID, but it's moving forward. It's going to start, compliance starts January 1st of next year. So, and I think a lot of people are paying attention to this. I think New York, I don't think it was the first one out of the gate. I think Seattle may have been the first city out of the gate on a climate emissions reduction. I think there was in 2013. I think there's a little bit of difference between Seattle and New York, though, because I think Seattle's greenhouse gas is the largest contributor, came from the transportation industry. And New York, it's more from infrastructure. So I think New York is more of the focus for cities, both nationally and internationally, to see how we handle it here. And if there's success, certainly, you can probably see it being adopted in other cities, maybe to some extent. There could be modifications made. There's always tweaks here and there, but again, it's interesting times, and we'll just have to see, how this all plays out.
I mean, it's really interesting to just think about what's happening in other areas as well. If there are case studies, for instance, from how Seattle has been managing this for the last 10 years, or I think, for instance, even just the building code that other states like California have and how strict they are. That might be interesting for those in New York to start to take a look at, as well as it starts to hit them. Tina, what are some of the things that are most important for buildings to be aware of and to start monitoring as they are thinking about their sustainability and their emissions? Specifically, I think Local Law 97 is part of that, but I think more generally, these rules all apply.
Yeah, sure, Lindsay. So the most important things for building owners to be aware of when it comes to Local Law 97 and all the energy codes, various energy codes, is that they need to start planning now. Energy retrofits, there are so many different alternatives and technologies. They take a long time to plan. They're very expensive, so they take a long time to fund. So starting now is crucial. And as I said earlier, that every single month that they don't do it, that they delay doing it, they're just paying Con Edison or National Grid or the DEP more money for that doesn't need to be wasted. One problem, though, I gotta go back to Sophia's point. So there's a benchmarking report that's filed every year, and it's been filed for over 10 years now. And it's a public database, and you can download it. And we have downloaded it and we have reviewed it every single year for the last 5 years or so. It's been public. And so we're now, because we work in the co-op and condo industry, we only look at the database. We sort it, filter it by co-ops and condos. And in that data, we see clear indication that over 70% of buildings are misreporting their energy use. I mean, so if a building is built in 1900, they still have 12 T12 light fixtures on 24/7. They're using oil number 4, which is going to be banned. That's how bad that is. And they have an A. They're clearly not reporting all of their energy use and all of their water use. So it's very easy to detect certain patterns. And I'll give you one more example. Building next to us, they had a D. And they had a very low rating, Energy Star score of 20. And it goes to, for those who don't know, Energy Star score is up to 100. So if you see that your building has less than 10 or over 80, it's probably not correct, in my opinion, and based on the data that we have analyzed, right? So this building had oil and they had a D. They replaced their boiler with 100% of natural gas. Now, the cooking gas is typically in most buildings about 3% of their total energy use. So this building, they went from a D to an A. And when we looked at their data, only 3% of their total energy use comes from gas, which means that they never added the account with their heating gas. So for all of you A and Bs out there, don't start celebrating.
So, Tina, I want to prod on that for a second. Do you think the misreporting, is some of this just based on kind of knowledge and they're just not sure? Or do you think some of this is actually they're omitting things in order to get the higher score and that's going to come back and bite them later?
I think that it's intentional. I think it's miscommunication. So the board makes the decision, right? Then they instruct the property manager to do their job. The property manager, in most cases, hires an ESCO or has a partnership with an ESCO to provide fixed prices of energy for the building. Many of these ESCOs, they actually are the ones who file the benchmarking report, or they are the ones who upload the data. Or nowadays, it used to be uploaded every year, but nowadays it's actually a green button with Con Edison, National Grid, and the DEP, where they just hit the button. But if they don't have all the accounts in there and it's not been set up correctly, just hitting the green button is not going to help anyone. And that's our opinion, is that they need to go in and fix what they have entered into Energy Star score.
Got it. Okay, so it's not as simple as it may seem. All right.
No,
We
I
have
don't think
one
so.
question that I think, Tina, while you're chatting right now, because you are the sensor queen, about getting more information about those motion sensor laws and what is required for 2024. Do you have any more insight into that?
Yes, I do know 2 laws. I have them. I just read about this the other. I have known about it, but I haven't been that involved.
We can also
So
send a follow-up to all of the guests here with a link to that as well.
we can,
Yeah.
but Mark, this is local law 188 and local law 134. And it used to, we got a lot of, and the reason I keep on talking about sensors is this, let me tell you. Basements and hallways on average, and this is some study and I don't know the exact, is unoccupied 90% of the time, which means that 90% of the electricity, no matter if they're on LEDs or on T4s or on regular A lights bulbs, the old-fashioned ones, it's a waste, right? So 90% of the energy use in those areas should be eliminated, in my opinion.
Okay, amazing. And Sophia, to your point on data, because you brought this up originally, we do have a question about how boards can leverage that data to reduce their management costs and their overall operating costs. And do you have any idea around kind of some sources for this, or how they should be thinking about even how to collect some of this data?
Oh gosh, I don't even know. I don't even know how to start from there. I just know that there's a lot of fantastic data, especially in New York City. There's a lot of fantastic data that is available from, NYC.gov. There's also OpenStreetMaps data, but there's a lot of great data just at the building level. A great place is streeteasy.com. You can look at your building because one of StreetEasy, part of the secret sauce behind StreetEasy is that you can look at everything that's happening within the building, all the sales, rentals, but also, all the public records that are associated with that building. So that's a good place to start.
That's great.
And I would add, Lindsay, I would add to on that, in terms of databases, New York City Accelerator, in terms of the local law 97, does have, you can certainly look up a building address. They have a huge database of all the impacted buildings. You can do a search by buildings, by address, and it'll show projected, it'll show compliance or non-compliance and projected penalties. So, you have that information at your fingertips, which is great. So, you can start today if you haven't started already.
Amazing. And Chris, I feel like this is a good build for you. What about, are there incentives or benefits for buildings that are already good on local law 97? Is the city kind of saying, good job, we're going to give you a credit or something like that? Or is it really just penalties?
Yeah, no, I don't think anyone's going to give you a pat on the back. It'd be nice. No, I haven't seen anything like that. I think this is going to just be, picking up the slack on those buildings that are not, that are not up to the new standards for the city. And again, it's going to be interesting to see. I think the big thing here is going to be, what happens if a building just can't get there, for good faith reasons. And I think you're going to find that's going to be for a lot of different buildings. So we'll see how this develops. I think it's going to be, maybe, a modification or modifications as this continues to roll out. Is it a one-off good faith excuse, or is it a continual thing? Will you have to show progress and, your efforts to the city, on a continuing basis?
And so to some extent, you're saying the effort does matter here. So even if you don't nail it all entirely, making sure that you have a paper trail essentially of the efforts does make a difference.
In all situations, you really just can't throw your hands up and just say, we tried. You have to, you have to show you've tried, you did your due diligence as a board, explored all available means, certainly paper things, what you can convey over, you're going to have your proof, right? So, certainly if you started later in the game, I think that, may be viewed negatively against you, right? So if you haven't done so, I think, the time, is now, because you have less than 9 months before you have to start gearing up and getting those emissions down. Tina, it looks like you wanted to mention something.
I wanted to pipe in there, but the fines for not complying are huge. So we have spoken from time to time. We get a call from a property manager or a board or a reporter, and one of those have told us that they speak with individuals who say, "Oh, we're just going to ignore it. This is never going to happen," and that is not a good practice because they're going to get fined. But that's like anything else with fines. You don't know are they really going to enforce it or they're not going to enforce it, but it's a big risk to take. And if you're in a co-op or a condo, the owner, it's not the board who is paying for this. The owner, is the one who is ultimately going to pay for this, right? Yeah. Can I add to Kelly? Kelly asked a question about incentives.
Mm-hmm.
So if you do not need to comply with Local Law 97 right now, then there are still incentives. There are plenty of incentives, and the both the National Grid and Con Edison, they have certain criteria. So it's no reflection on if you have to comply or not comply to Local Law 97. It depends on what kind of heating fuel you use and what kind of heating systems you have, etc., and your air conditions and all of this. But another thing is that I have heard that they're actually changing Local Law 97, and there are discussions that they're going to take it down to 10,000 square feet. So I've heard this, so I've
heard it as well, and not from you.
Yeah. So just because you don't have to comply today, I would do my best to start planning as soon as possible. And don't forget, if you retrofit your building, you will start saving money now. There's no reason not to do it. And the planet, don't forget the planet.
So we had a question about how buildings should start financially planning for these. And it feels like, just to recap, your answer is you can either pay the fines or you can put that money towards making upgrades to your building that will help you save money on energy costs. Is that kind of a good way to think about it for these buildings?
Yes. Yes.
Awesome.
And we have taken a few buildings and we have compared how much their fines are versus, or how much extra energy use they're using and how much their fines for Local Law 97 are if they upgrade versus how much their fines would be if they're clearly not reporting the right information, how much the fines themselves would be for not doing their best. And those fines are higher. The same way, actually, you might hear, and it's written in some of the industry magazines, that, oh, you should remeasure your building. Because if you have more square footage, then you can use more emission, right? Because it's emission per square foot. The data that we have analyzed, so if you have a larger square feet, then you're gonna get higher property taxes.
There's a trade-off for everything.
And the property taxes right now might not be the same case in 2035 or further out, but right now the property taxes per square foot are much higher than the fines, the Local Law 97 fines.
That is a great point. There's a great question that I think is a great transition for us to talk about resident expectations and the demographic shifts as well. So there's a question we've got about, great, we're talking about large cities and what's happening there, but what about new construction and development in other parts of the country, particularly in kind of more second tier cities or smaller cities and rural areas, and any tools to consider. And I think before we jump into that, just to set a little bit of context there, because this is one of the main trends that we've seen, is the last few years have really seen major demographic shifts, right? Remote work took hold. A lot of people left major urban areas and migrated to smaller cities and rural areas. We will see how long that sticks. If you look at kind of, what's happening in New York with rent, people are definitely coming back, but there are certainly people that have chosen to kind of relocate in this time. And I think even though that's not the case right now, in 2021, 2022, we had crazy low interest rates. We had the most first-time home buyers ever. In 2021, Freddie Mac financed 500,000 loans to first-time home buyers. And that was a 22% increase from the year before. So just lots of new people, right, becoming homeowners, people moving into different areas. And I think all of that kind of indicates that there is a new wave of resident. There's a new wave, particularly of HOA member, because they're buying into these communities, and they come with them with a really different set of expectations about how the world should operate. And so I'm curious if we can maybe start with kind of what's happening on the resident side of things, and then we can talk specifically to this question around what's happening for new construction and development, any tools to be considering there as well. So just generally, are there any other trends as far as what's happening with changing resident expectations that you all are noticing? And Sophie, maybe I'll start with you on that, because I feel like you might have some research here.
I know we have research on everything. So we actually did a residential experience survey study last year, and it took place in 9 cities across the world. Some U.S. cities, some in Asia and Europe, and so it was about 13,000 people that we were able to connect with. And so we looked at what matters the most to home satisfaction. Is it the unit, the building, or the neighborhood? And so our analysis found that it's the unit level elements that make the biggest contribution to feeling satisfied with your residence. And when we tested respondents' appetites for a variety of cost saving solutions potentially, people were most averse to sacrificing those in-unit features and personal space as opposed to building amenities. So it turns out that apartment dwellers are highly open to foregoing many building amenities if it means an opportunity to cut costs. And what became clear is that residents place a higher value on these in-unit features and personal space than on common amenity areas, which, this was very enlightening for us as a design firm, designing, residential buildings. So that was a great finding for us.
That's so interesting because I feel like there's this new trend now. Every condo you see going up has like a little co-working space, and they've dedicated all of these areas to these communal things. And so what you're saying actually is those might not be the best use of dollars.
Well, co-working space maybe, but like those pet grooming studios or the yoga studios that you might find in the highly amenitized buildings aren't, as, beneficial as one might think.
Interesting. Chris, Tina, any other thoughts on kind of what you're noticing with residents?
I'm noticing a lot. We interact with a lot of residents, and so they are definitely a newer generation who really prioritize sustainability. In my building, we have e-cycle, we have Refashion New York, we have organics recycling, and they come in and look at the basement, where the lights go on and off. And they're like, oh, you're so green, they look so good. And they really seem to prioritize that. Another thing that they prioritize is communication. So the super or the property manager or the board, they send out newsletters on a regular basis. They send out communication. So there's a lot of communication, and they can just hit the button, contact the super, hit the button, contact this person. And I didn't mean your super, I meant the resident manager. And so communication is very important. And then thirdly, we work primarily with old buildings, and installing amenities for those are very important, or appears to us to be very important. So using all the empty basement space to various things that can be installed, gyms, bike storage, extra storage. There's normally not enough room in old buildings to put community rooms and lounges and stuff like that, and to use the roof space. I mean, majority of New York City's roofs are empty. They're black tar roof and maybe a white tar roof, but they're a tar roof that is completely unused. And this is valuable real estate in one of the most expensive cities in the world. And there's no reason for the residents not to be able to use it.
Interesting. So we have a question about what amenities are owners willing to forego. So you've mentioned a few things that just make sense for buildings because it's space that's usually underutilized anyway. Sophia, do you have any other insights on that specifically though? For are there any amenities, I think outside the ones that you mentioned, like pet spas, yoga rooms, that definitely feel like they're not a great return on investment?
Well, I'm not going to talk about what isn't a great return on investment, but I will say that, these respondents value so much more like in-home, in-unit features, right? Such as, you know, an in-unit washer dryer, as opposed to having, you know, a pool in their building, or, you know, something that's more of a common amenity. They would rather have it for their own personal unit. That being said, you know, with the rise of remote work, you know, certainly things like having fast access to internet, or, you know, access to sort of a business center or co-working space within the building is valuable. But we did find that the um, the the greatest likelihood, or the greatest predictor of what that would the greatest predictor of what of when a resident would recommend their building to somebody else is if they feel that their building is well maintained, clean, safe, etc. So if you focus on, like, I guess the outside or
Fundamentals.
the fundamentals,
Yeah.
like that actually is the greatest predictor, more so than having, you know, this highly amenitized building.
Really helpful. We've only got a few minutes left. This went so fast. So I feel like there's some really great questions here. I'm just going to flip us into the audience Q&A side, and we'll kind of take a couple more of these questions. If there's any more from the audience here, we'll try to get to them. There's a really great question around, Tina. So you had mentioned that the energy service companies, right, they're the ones that are uploading the data, and sometimes the data is not quite mapping the way it should be for benchmarking. So we have a question around, how can boards take better control over this data? Yep.
And it's a very good question, because we have actually worked with boards where we have been trying to get this data and we can't get the data. So in Energy Star Portfolio Manager, you can actually, so if you're the owner of the data, you're the one who set up the account for building XYZ. Then you're the owner, you have the password, you're the owner of this. They have added in the last, I saw this maybe a couple of years ago, that they can add like another person. But we have tried to get these energy ESCOs to do this, and we have never succeeded in them actually sharing our data.
So are you saying, Tina, that the boards should set up that account, like their management company shouldn't do it, like someone on the board needs to take responsibility for that to ensure they have access?
It's too late, because all of these buildings, the 18,000, they're already set up. Someone said to me the other day, they said, oh, you can just set up a second account. But the thing is that Con Edison and the DEP and National Grid, they only allow it to connect to one account. So that's not even possible. But we are, I mean, one of the firms that do a lot of these reportings, that we try to get them to share, and we even did a screen share. We said, this is how you do it. And you click here and you say, add Tina Larsson, and they didn't do it. And I don't know if that's like some kind of internal compliance on their end, or but there's so many different entities. So maybe they feel, oh, they can't just share it with us. And even if the board told them to do it, okay, so it's this board. So there are so many different, and they're really hired by the property manager. The property manager is their client. So how do you deal with so many different layers of it? It's probably something that Chris could figure out.
Yeah, Chris, I'm curious, have you run into any of this?
No, I haven't. And, you know, I mean, that just seems like it's begging for some kind of resolution there. It
sounds like we've got a consortium forming over here.
Can't get on and see your data. You know, I know that, you know, for the energy portfolio managers, that's going to be the benchmark for these buildings, you know, from 2025. Actually, I think it's 2025 forward. So yeah, that'll be, you know, interesting to see if, you know, issues like that are resolved. You know, Tina, you know, please keep us updated on that.
And so what we'll do for all of the attendees here as well is I'll send out a follow-up email with some of the nuggets from today, but then also the email addresses for these fine folks here, so you can ask any further questions and connect with our panelists today. We've got 1 more minute left. So before I let our panelists go, I'm just going to ask them to leave us just with one parting thought for today. So if you all don't mind sharing just one final insight from the conversation today, or just one thing that you think, folks from that have attended should keep in mind. I'm going to kick it off with Sophia.
Oh, all right. I'm just going to, put out an idea that's really out there. But in terms of technology, and this is, I think, inspired by the fact that both Lindsay and I are going to be at South by Southwest later on in the week. I would definitely keep an eye out for AI, because I really think that AI is going to transform the real estate industry. And as a prop tech veteran, I am waiting for the moment when, for the time when the real estate industry can be truly disrupted. So that's my.
That's a juicy one. All right, Chris, parting insight for today.
Well, in my theme of being proactive, I would just add on, don't wait until tomorrow to do what you can do today.
That's quotable. I like that. Amazing.
That is quotable. So the final nugget from me is that using technology to help you run your building proactively, even though it might seem overwhelming, but the risk of not operating in a reactive mode, only reacting to emergencies, has gotten so out of hand that they really need to take action now.
Amazing. Thank you all so much for sharing your knowledge with us today. Thank you to the participants that took precious time out of their days to join us and ask such great questions. We're going to wrap for now, but we'll have the recording of this session available. And like I said, we'll send the follow-up email to all of our attendees so that they can continue to connect with you all. Thank you again. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Great.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for having us.